So America, in its values, was closer to the Bolshevik Revolution's values than I think most of us would want to admit. And this is probably the hardest point for people to swallow. And McCarraher's whole book is about how we become enchanted by capitalism, right? And all of its magical promises. And magic is an important word to use in this context because something that he points out is how magical our thinking has been, right? That first of all, he's discussed the enchanting fiction of corporate personhood as though it really is a sort of human entity, not just a fiction, really, in most people's minds perhaps, but a reality, and in which caring management is possible, care for both workers as well as consumers. Also, we have this savior complex in which we've identified capitalism, maybe particularly neoliberal capitalism, with egalitarianism, as though it can bring not only to ourselves but to the entire world these incredible values of equality and humanity, not to mention material abundance, but human dignity and so on. These are huge claims that are religious in nature and have become a matter of the American faith. And most importantly, for this particular part of his book, he deals with, I guess what you might say, the Disneyfication of American culture. Now, he zeroes in on Disney, but we certainly could broaden this out into, our entertainment culture more generally, which does kind of dominate the world in a lot of respects, not just the United States, but it has spread itself out across the world. As far as American films, American TV, American video games, and so on. So he says in, I think it's the second chapter of part 5, unlike Freud, Disney did not consider his archaeology of fantasy a disenchanted analysis of desire. More like Carl Jung, with his theory of primordial archetypal images in the collective unconscious, Disney unearthed and employed motifs as mythical therapy for the machine age. I haven't watched a lot of Disney. I did watch Fantasia at one point. I know I've watched some Mickey Mouse cartoons. I don't make a habit of watching Disney, although I have the Disney Channel right now because I wanted to get Hamilton and finally watch that. But for the most part, reading this, it helped me because I know that Disney and maybe this kind of entertainment more generally is and has been huge in the United States for a long time. And there are a lot of archetypal motifs. I mean, one could look at these, films and earlier the cartoons as well as really kind of like American mythologies, American epics, and so on. And there's just so much in this about Disney that's just amazing that, I can't even convey it all. These are scenes from Fantasia, by the way, which is really trippy. And probably you should watch that, if nothing else, to get an idea of what's being talked about here. But I just want to read a few quotes from this part of the book because it's just so good that I can't be terribly concise here. So he says, for instance, at the point of production, the Disney company was a paragon of taylorization, that's scientific management. In the same way that scientific management had rationalized industry by replacing humans with machines, Disney had demonstrated that he could hire people to make animated drawings, always obedient, perfectly under control, and doing the work better than living players. Wow, I'd never really thought of this in this way. But think about how many of our most popular films today are animated, and the fact that means that at least they're not employing actors in the same way, and not writers either, because in the same way anyway, because there's so many of them that are like remakes or they're retakes, whatever. Anyway, so here's another one. He says, in short films such as Santa's Workshop from 32 and Mickey's Amateurs from 37, and arguably later in Pinocchio, Disney sought to reconcile audiences to the technology of mass production, sensing the blend of fascination and distrust in popular attitudes towards industrial technology. Disney endowed machines with souls. So yeah, like he's talking about how many of Disney's films and cartoons dealt with mechanization. Like, see here, in a way, Mickey's dealing with this. It's a self-moving broom, right? It's like a magical broom. And seeing the new technology is kind of magical. And yes, somewhat confrontational, but Mickey overcomes it. Mickey can trick it. And, he deals with this particular aspect of it through Walter Benjamin, the philosopher. He says, Walter Benjamin said of Disney that far from being a spokesman for Victorian propriety, it was in fact one of the first artists in the culture industry to adopt, quote, the cause of the absolutely new. The cause of things novel and continuously changing technology. He says Benjamin attributed to Disney films the same, quote, double meaning he saw in the cinema generally, the depiction of figures in a collective dream, enacting both the nightmare of the present and the prospect of utopian transformation. So, dealing with the nightmare of the present, kind of overcoming it through the daily battles, not completely overcoming it, but these daily victories that a character like Mickey could have, and also, the prospect that someday these novelties would create this utopian future. Not to mention the fact that this is a form of entertainment which takes us into that future or into a fantasy state where our mind can then dwell, and not just when we're watching them, but, later as well, so that we're not in the here and now. And even if we are in the here and now, our reaction to what's here and now is now conditioned somewhat by the storyline and images. Again, quoting from Benjamin, he says, indeed, in these films, Benjamin remarked, quote, mankind makes preparations to survive civilization, to persist beyond the horrors of mechanized oppression. And then he says, at the same time, Benjamin contended the technical prowess of the animations promised, quote, a redemptive existence, a future of harmony between humanity and the machines it has made. And doesn't a lot of American entertainment, maybe particularly animated entertainment, deal with the clash and the promised harmony with technology? Again, he says, especially through Mickey Mouse's misadventures, Disney both encouraged sadistic violence and immunized audiences against mass psychosis. Maybe not right now. I think that's what we're seeing. So maybe it's worn off. But anyway, he says, representing collective longings on screen in such a way as to vent and then neutralize them. Disney triggered a, quote, therapeutic explosion of the unconscious with no revolutionary consequences. Maybe it's because our entertainment industry isn't up to the task anymore, or because it's exhausted all of its tricks and is in this sort of decrepit stage where nothing ever can be done that's new, that really captures the imagination well enough. Maybe that's why it's not working anymore, to provide this, quote, therapeutic explosion of the unconscious, which, by the way, and this to get back to the theme of religion did this, right, and does this, but arguably in a much healthier way, in a way that's real, that doesn't lead towards worshiping Disney or entertainment or, mechanization or, things, but rather at least, something that is higher, that is transcendent, that is not us. It's been replaced by this Mammonism, and it's almost as though the priestly class, the class that forms the intermediary, between God and man, God being Mammon in this case, is Disney writ large, right? Not just Disney. We don't want to just totally go off on Disney here, because Disney just represents this function, right? And for a time, it was on top of it. It was the best and innovative, and this is the time that he's dealing with. One more, and then I'll stop quoting for a bit. Well, no, I won't. I've got one more. I've got one more after this. He says, precisely because it afforded release, escapism was a form, however temporary, of emancipation from Fordist drudgery, liberating audiences for a few enchanting hours from the, quote, time clock mechanisms of American life. Disney enabled his audience to, quote, stage a revolt against participating and legislating. That's a quote from Sergei Eisenstein, which is from a book, Eisenstein on Disney. So hopefully you're beginning to get a feel for this, and you'll want to read this. This is just, I'm not doing it justice. It's really, oh my gosh, it's very good. I'll leave you with this quote. And by the way, it looks like Fantasia was remade. Didn't see that one. Or maybe they just brought it back out and colorized it. I don't know. But anyway, I only have seen the original. I'll leave you with this quote from McCarraher. Great quote. He says, Disney merged the longing for enchantment with the submission to the power of modern technology. Now, remember, not only submission to the technology of the film, right? The animation, the film itself, right? But also through the themes of the film, through the very existence of the film, submission to the economic forces that one might not otherwise be able to cope with, the societal and technological forces that might otherwise be seen as something that's not quite human, that isn't treating people like human beings, or is dehumanizing, okay? Anyway, I'll continue. He says, the animated replication of enchantment would pacify but not fulfill that desire. That would be because it can't possibly do that, in McCarraher's view, and I would agree with this. Only a true encounter with the transcendent God can do that. And so he says it would even encourage a flight from reality into the worlds of computer generation, fostering an indifference to material reality that is now crucial to the maintenance of the corporate state. That indifference to the material reality is literally that even when we're not directly involved in watching TV, films, video games, videos, entertainment generally, a lot of our mind is still living there. And so I think this is a caution that perhaps the first step towards liberation, and by the way, this is a theme that Slavoj Žižek develops a lot, right? That's a lot of what he's about, is that this is actually a means of venting. It's a means of allowing people a release, a feeling of being subversive, a feeling of rebellion, a feeling of participating in things they can't have. All of this helps people to avoid material reality. And perhaps we have to finally confront the world around us for real, without all these lenses that we look through, in order to see it for what it is and to grasp that we can indeed do something different with it, that it is within our power. So it's interesting that that liberating thought could be tied up with a rejection of this material and fantastical God, right, of Mammon, and a reorientation towards both the transcendent God and the material reality that the transcendent God created.